Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Carl, you've been investing in rental properties for quite a long time. I'm sure you've tried a lot of things over the years, and you've seen what works and you've seen what doesn't work.
Yeah, Dan, I've been investing for over 40 years. I've seen a lot. I think that I've trialed and errored almost everything. So, yeah, I believe I've got things that will work in any markets, but by no means do I think that you can just set it and forget it with the changes that come about in the economy, the technology, the laws, the taxes, etc. But I have a pretty good handle on what works and what doesn't, I think.
I've got a lot of questions for Carl today. On the show, we're going to talk about his opinion on investing out of state, whether he thinks that's a good idea or not. We'll talk about his strategy to keep long-term tenants. And we'll also see what type of properties have performed best for him. Carl owns single families, duplexes, fourplexes. He owns some commercial buildings. We'll see if there's one type of property that has been most profitable for him. Joining us on the show today from Fort Lauderdale is Carl Fisher. We'll take a really quick break. We'll thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll meet Carl. A good deal on a rental property isn't going to last very long. To win properties today, you need to move quickly when a deal comes on the market, but it takes time to analyze a property. I want to let you know about an app where you can analyze deals on your phone in seconds. It's called Ask Rick. That's RIC for Rental Income Calculator. You can analyze a deal with the push of a button. You can figure out the rent, your mortgage payment, your expenses, and figure out the cash flow. If the numbers make sense, you can make an offer right there on the app, or you can send a calendar invite to your agent to see the property in person. Ask Rick is currently offering a free 7-day trial. Just search for Ask Rick in the App Store or go to Just Ask Rick. That's RIC, justaskrick.com. The first step in buying a rental property is to get pre-qualified, and I would suggest you work with a lender that specializes in working with investors, because the last thing you want to have happen is to get to closing and find out the money's not there and you can't close. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and she'll pre-qualify you for free if you mention Rental Income Podcast. Find out more today. Contact Chaley at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056. A lot of people live in areas where the numbers just don't work. The price you're going to pay for a property is too high and the rents aren't high enough to make things work out. And so they look at investing out of state. And I know that you have invested out of state over the years. With your experience, do you think it's a good idea for investors to invest out of state, or do you think it's maybe better to try to stay locally if you can?
I have done it out of state. I do believe that if it's local, an hour's drive from where you are, I think that is good. I traveled to states and would invest in both of them. But I think more importantly, whether it's local or different states, is that you have enough properties so that you've got a scalable benefit there, so that when you call a plumber, he knows that you own these properties and you can get him out there and he wants to pay attention to you. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have the economies of scale. I didn't have a big enough operation to demand the service that I get where I have commercial, residential, retail, warehouse space. So when I had that, you had one or two plumbers, one or two handyman, one or two electricians that would come out and fix things, and they knew they worked for you and not the tenant.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, yeah, I like diversification, and you can get a lot of diversification in real estate, but I also think that you want to look and understand the area that you're in, because each area causes you, to set up another network.
Now, what about the type of property? Like, I know that you own single families and duplexes and fourplexes and commercials. I mean, you basically have done it all. When you look back over your investing career, is there one type of property that you think is the best that maybe has made you the most money?
That's a great question, Dan. When I got into commercial real estate, retail, office space, uh, arena or venue, I thought that was really good because I liked the triple net. The effort was down. You rented to entrepreneurs or businessmen who took care of their own problems, and you didn't get the calls and the little annoyances and things that you get in a single family. You don't have to hear about a washer not washing or a garbage disposal, etc. And most home people are calling you at night when they find the problem. Business people, if you get a call, is generally during the day. But then on the flip side of that, it's very easy to rent a single family home. People are always looking for them. I think they're probably the things that are in most demand in most markets and economies. Whereas sometimes you can own a commercial office space and it'll be down, 6 months, a year, or sometimes even 2 years after 2007 and 8, because people have to come in and renovate or they want smaller space, etc. So I don't know if there's one really easier than the other, and dollars per square foot are out. So I never really looked at it as to which one makes more money. I think it's not so much the type of real estate that you're in, but where it is and what you expect it to do.
Sure. How about bedrooms? Like with your residential stuff, have you found 3 bedrooms are better than 2 bedrooms, or 4 bedrooms are the best? Like, have you noticed that one size rental is better?
Um, One bedrooms I think are not as good as the others. 2 bedrooms I look for as a minimum, and primarily I like 4 bedrooms, and I like the 4 bedrooms because uh, in college towns it's nice to have the bigger bedrooms because each person wants their separate bedroom, and you can charge like a dorm room. So those have always been big money makers. Um, from that aspect. So the more bedrooms, uh, the more rent we generally see.
Mhm.
But again, you also get children, and I've had a place with a pool, and I worry about kids that can't swim when you have a pool in the property, etc.
Yeah,
So
that sounds like a huge liability. To
yeah.
like, did you have any problems with that property?
No, luckily we did, and obviously you pay the insurance on there. But then again, I am looking at renting to people whose kids already know how to swim,
Right.
and we don't have the diving boards on the pool. But luckily, anything that we've had on the water or with the pool, there's not been any drownings. But we also follow the local rules and put fences around them with the proper straps, and some of the houses even have the alarms on the doors. So
Yeah.
there are ways you can minimize it, and you do the best you can. And and even when you put a couple in there, you don't know that they're not going to have another child.
Right. That's true. That's true.
So
How about when you're pricing your rentals? I think it's just human nature to want to price your rentals as high as you can get, and to make as much money as possible. But we've had a lot of people on the show that price their properties a little bit low to maybe create more demand and to reduce turnover, because if tenants feel like they have a really good deal, that they're not going to move. Where do you land on that? Do you think it's a good idea to try to make as much as possible, or to go a little bit low?
I generally am probably the lowest renter in the neighborhood. And the reason I do that is I want the best tenant. I've seen uh, things over the years where, you you have a high rent, you get somebody in there. Generally, it's somebody with, lousier credit and basically not as good a tenant. Because you don't see as many. If you've got the lowest rent in the area, basically you see everybody and people are fighting for your rental. So it stays rented longer. You don't have that turnover in time. Now, I will leave it low for the people that are in there because every year, if prices go up, then it makes it harder for them to move, right? Not only do you have the moving costs, but you've got, $200 or $300 more in rent as you go along. So I've just found it better to get a better tenant and forego some of the money.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then do you raise rent at all?
I do if I get a lot of calls every time someone calls, because we have a clause in our leases that basically say, you've got to fix everything under $150. We don't want to be changing light bulbs and things like that. So if it's a valid call, no, we won't raise the rent. Like if a refrigerator goes out after somebody's been there 8 years, we'll get a new refrigerator. But we don't generally raise the rent to good tenants. If they're not good and we don't care if we're going to lose them, yeah, we'll raise them. Mm-hmm. We use it as a tool to maintain great tenants.
Now, I want to ask you about leverage, because this is something that comes up on the podcast constantly. We have people with all different opinions on this. We've have some people that don't want any debt at all on their properties. They want to own everything free and clear, to people that want to take the maximum amount of leverage they can get. As someone that's been around for 40 years, I'm sure you've seen people get in trouble with leverage, and maybe seen people miss opportunities by not having enough leverage. Like, what do you think is the right amount of leverage to use, if any, with your rental portfolio?
Well, again, I'm probably on the on that scale you just talked about. I'm probably at the side that says use as much leverage as you can. I like using leverage, number one, because it's an asset protection tool. Because if your house is or your property is fully mortgaged, they don't get anything by suing you for it. So it cuts the attorneys off, and then anybody suing needs a retainer to the attorney. So I like it from that aspect. But then again, it depends what you're doing with that leveraged money. If you're using that for down payments on 2 or 3 more properties, that's great. If you're using it to invest in other assets that you think are good, maybe you're lending money with it, and you borrow the money at 3% and lend it out at 8%. So you're making more money back and being able to pay off that debt, not only with the tenant that's in your building, but with the interest that you're making on the money. If you're taking leverage and spending it on vacations or personal needs, I'm not a fan of that. I think that you should only borrow money to make money.
That makes sense. Now, what about your wife? How does your wife feel about the rentals? Is she involved much, or is it mainly you? Or are you guys working together? How do you have things set up?
Obviously my wife knows what it was. We tried to work together a little bit more in the beginning. But she'll get frustrated. She doesn't understand a lot of times the tenant mentality. And some tenants are slobs and cause problems themselves. But primarily now she's off to the sidelines, does, some of the, takes some of the calls every now and then, but basically is off to the sidelines and will work with the bookkeeper if she does anything at all, and leaves it primarily up to me, which is okay because it falls into my wheelhouse, and likes it. And obviously she likes the cash flow. She also likes the fact that, we have time to go on cruises and vacations, that are, more than 2 or 3 days or weekends.
Sure. Yeah. Can you talk deals with her? I know with my wife, like she can take a little bit of real estate talk, but I can see her eyes glaze over and I lose her when I start talking about it too much. So like, do you have to kind of temper how much you talk to her about different deals you're looking at or different issues that might be coming up?
Yeah, what I use her for is, the people that are involved. Sometimes she's got a sixth sense when it comes to that, and it's, do you want to do business with these people, and what do you think about it? But as far as the deal goes, et cetera, I use my sons more for that than I
Yeah.
do my wife, and she doesn't really want to get into those deals.
That's good. Now, something else that has come up on the podcast that quite often people have said that rents never go down, that they always go up. And I know this is going to be individual by the market, but you've been in a lot of different markets. You've been around for a long time. Have you ever seen rents go down, or do they generally go up over time?
Generally, they'll go up over time, but yes, I have seen rents go down. And it was in 2008 and 9 after the crunch. I mean, I had businesses in my commercial buildings that said, "Hey, I don't need all this space." They might have 4,000 space, and then they cut it to 1,000, and then they cut it to 500, and then they moved into their garage at home, and then ultimately they moved off to Tennessee. So yeah, I have seen commercial space, and I've seen single family homes actually go down, and primarily this was in Florida and Pennsylvania that I saw it. It went down more in Florida than it did in the Northeast, but that's been the 2 years that I've seen rents go down. But again, you have to remember that a lot of times I don't move my rents up until the next tenant comes in.
And it's a temporary thing. So the rents,
Oh yeah,
they ultimately ended up going up, but just as we were working through a tough time in the economy, that was when you saw them come down. Okay.
Yeah, a tough time in the economy. But here's the other thing is when you look at how much the rents came down to what the price of the property came down, it was nothing. The most I've seen the rents go down is 10%. But in that same period, I saw properties come down 60%. They were 40% of their value. And it's a little bit like you're talking now. In some cities, it doesn't make sense to buy the properties. If the rents don't support it, you don't want to be paying something every month for a property. At least I don't. I'm always looking, the property has to have positive cash flow. Otherwise, I consider myself a speculator and not an investor.
Right. Now, I want to ask you a question about owning rentals in your IRA. And before I do, I just want to put it out there that you own a company where you help investors invest in their IRAs. So I just want to put that out there in full disclosure. But do you personally own rentals in your IRA?
I do.
Okay.
I love, in my Roth IRA, tax-free income, for my life is great. Okay. Obviously I'm over 59 and a half, so I can take the money out at any time, and it's all tax-free. So if I get $1,000 a month coming in from a property, I can take that $1,000 out of my Roth, put it in my pocket, and never pay any taxes on it. So yeah, I learned about that, in the early 1990s, and it was so good. And I started telling my sphere of influence about it, and they all liked it. And they actually said, "Why don't you open up a company, because we trust you and we like you and we see how you're doing this stuff." And they found it hard to believe. It was too good to be true, when I saw it, and ultimately I opened up a company to support the people I knew, and then have grown it since 2003 and 4.
If you want to learn more about buying rental properties in your IRA, the name of Carl's company is Camaplan. And I've got a link to his website on my website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 317. If you want to learn more about the pros and the cons of buying a rental property in your IRA, I did an interview about 2 years ago with two different investors. One of them owns properties in his IRA and he's been real happy with it. Another investor who thinks it's a really bad idea to buy a rental property in your IRA, and they kind of gave their thoughts on it. It's a real educational episode. If you want to check that out, that's episode number 204. I'd like to thank today's sponsor for making this episode possible. It's Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, the lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge. She's a nationwide lender and she specializes in helping investors buy rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. You can find out more or set up a time to talk to Chaley. Just go to ridgelendinggroup.com and NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. I'll be back with a new interview next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.